Well, this is page 2 for the French Revolution. Section 2, this is also the second stage of the French Revolution. And this stage was marked by violence. So this is referred to as the radical stage of the revolution. Starting out in 1791, the Constitution marked the end of the first stage of the revolution, and some people felt that some of the reforms had not gone far enough, and some, of course, felt they went too far. We're going to go to 18. So we have a group called radicals. These were people favoring drastic change. They're the ones that didn't want to have the king, so they wanted King Louis XVI and his wife to be executed, and also for France to become a republic. Excuse me. King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, obviously felt it went too far. At some point they felt like their life was in danger, that they might be killed, so they tried to flee France. They got to the border and they were recognized and arrested and returned to Paris. Later we'll talk about how they were beheaded. This was January 21st of 1793 when they were beheaded. And a little interesting note, we don't think a lot about what's going on in other places, but this is 4 years after George Washington became our first president. One thing it said in the book is that there was a man who recognized the king because he remembered seeing his face on one of their bills, one of the currency. Okay, counter-revolution, a movement to restore the old way of government. And the French revolutionaries feared that this might happen, that once things had started, there would be people who wanted to then revert back to the way it was, the old regime. Kind of like with the Reformation that we talked about in previous chapters. The Catholic Church had a counter-reformation to bring things back. So counter-revolutionaries. Okay, the term suffrage means the right to vote. This came to all adult males for the first time when the Commune ordered elections to choose representatives for a new assembly. This was called the National Convention. And this was to all male citizens, not just those that held land, to all male citizens. Okay, the convention sentenced King Louis XVI as a traitor, and you know how we hear about, every vote counts. Well, he was convicted by a single vote. So people that didn't want him executed versus people who did, it was very close. But by one vote, he was voted to be executed. And later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, they were sentenced to death to be sent to the guillotine. Now the son, King Louis XVII, in the movie The Scarlet Pimpernel, they talked about him as being the Dauphin. And if you think about it, we never really saw him escape. There was the one man who kind of was a double agent. He sold secrets to both sides and played each side against the other. And the Scarlet Pimpernel left the Dauphin in his hands, and after that we don't know. So he maybe again sold him back to the revolutionaries, but it says that he died of unknown causes in the dungeons of the revolution. So he never really left. So with the guillotine, and this was actually created, the guillotine, by a doctor, which is really quite odd, but he wanted a more humane, quick way of executing people. The heavy blade is very quick, felt people would not feel any pain, and they felt it was a humane way to die. After executing, they usually would show the person's head. And these were well-attended events. In fact, some people said they didn't like the guillotine because it was over so quick. They liked to watch the executions. There were people who actually went around to the crowds of people watching and sold concessions, you know, maybe drinks or treats or whatever. And I remember one thing that was sold were little earrings, and they had little guillotines on them. Just a major public event to go to these beheadings. Okay, a couple of groups on both sides. We have the Jacobins. They were a radical group of the National Convention. They seized land of nobles and abolished titles of nobility. These were the prominent members, or the prominent members of this group were George Danton and Maximilien de Robespierre. The other group, Girondists, these were the moderate members of the convention, and this group wanted the king to stay alive. Of course, the Jacobins, they were the radical group and wanted him executed. The committee was dominated by Robespierre. So interesting thing, George Danton at a point felt like he was maybe in danger, and some of the people that were supporters of him worried that if they were too close, then they might be in danger, so then they started to oppose him. Well, since they're opposing him, then that led to his execution. And it said in the book that something about he's calmly walking up to be executed, and he said, make sure to hold up my head so everyone can see it's a nice one, or something like that. And then later, Maximilien de Robespierre himself is also beheaded by the guillotine. Oh, and when people were going to be sent to be executed, it was kind of funny. They said, oh yeah, they're going to the National Barber. So that's a really close shave. So this is George Danton and Maximilien de Robespierre on the right. So as people were going to be executed, they loaded them in carts. It said in one place that they marched them through the streets for an hour and a half before getting them to the place where the guillotines took place, or the execution, sorry. So people could scoff and jeer at them as they were paraded through the streets. Okay, the Committee of Public Safety, this was set up by the Jacobins, and they called for a national draft, and soldiers chanted liberty, equality, and fraternity. There was a war that was taking place with the Austrians and Prussians, and the French were not doing very well, so they called for this national draft to take place. Then we move on to the Reign of Terror. This was 1793 to 1794. It's estimated maybe around 40,000 people in total were executed. So the Reign of Terror was a brutal program to silence critics of the government, began by Robespierre, who was the leading member of the committee. A new constitution set up a republic. This was headed by 5 men called the Directory, and the Directory's fall marked the end of the French Revolution. So this happens a lot. If you have a revolution, you have a new government or new people that come to the forefront, then maybe there's other groups that think, well, I don't like them, and they continue the revolution, or they overthrow this group and they have a new government. So sometimes it changes very quickly once that revolution has taken place. And in our last page of notes, we'll be talking about Napoleon. And I think we may have mentioned this one before, but nationalism, deep devotion to one's country, and obviously this was promoted by the revolution. Many people in support of their country, France, and I think this part here is actually alluding to the fact of imperialism. It's a chapter we we may not get to, but France and Great Britain probably the two key players where it shows them figuratively carving up the world, because a lot of the territory is around the world is controlled by Great Britain and France, and at one point mostly by Great Britain. So that's the end. Thank you.